Hello and welcome. I have exciting news. Because of listeners like you, we are starting a second season of the Special Ed Strategist podcast. The second season will bring new guests, deeper discussions, and more special ed strategizing. Also, I have launched solo episodes walking you through the IEP process, which can be daunting and overwhelming. It is my hope with these solo episodes to break down the IEP process into micro bits so that you can take those worries to wins. If you are new to the Special Ed Strategist podcast, kindly download, follow, and share so we can strategize more and empower parents and professionals to support students with learning differences and needs. Now onto today's show. Have you heard of D cubed, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia? Today we are focusing on the lesser known Ds, dyscalculia and dysgraphia. Welcome to the Special Ed Strategist podcast, where we strategize all things special ed. If you are a new parent to special education or a seasoned parent sitting at the IEP table, you don't want to miss this episode with Dr. Lauren, focusing on dyscalculia and dysgraphia, hoping to answer some questions and spark some ideas. I'm your host, Wendy Taylor. I'm a mom and special educator. I have sat on both sides of the IEP table as a parent and a professional. Over the last 25 years, I have made it my passion and mission to help parents and professionals bridge learning gaps, access special education services, and write kick-butt IEPs. If you want more tips, show us some love on social at Learning Essentials. If you are new to our podcast, give us a like and a follow. Let's get ready to strategize special education style. Welcome. Dr. Lauren, I am so ecstatic to have our conversation today, and I'm ready to jump in, learn about such an important topic. But before we do our deep dive, tell me a little bit about your experience and what your main focus is.
Yeah, absolutely. So Wendy, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I love talking about all things D cubed, and I also love connecting with people. So this is fantastic. So those of you who are not familiar with my work or familiar with me, my little elevator pitch is I started my career actually, thankfully, gratefully, in a private dyslexic school. And given, the movement of Sold a Story by Emily Hanford, I am so glad that I had all of my grounded research in Orton Gillingham from day one. So I actually started my career teaching elementary school in specialized private schools to neurodiverse students that had language-based learning differences. And then after that, I moved into the public school world, and I actually taught in the county in which I grew up in, and I was a special educator for about 4 years. And that was a great experience because I learned a lot about the IEP process and what that looks like and all that red tape that we've got to cut through in public school. So that is a little bit about my schooling journey. I've worked in nonprofits, coaching teachers. I've also been a learning specialist on the administrative team. And currently right now, I am a business owner and doing podcast interviews and just spending my time in ways that I feel serves my community and this space.
I love all of this, and two things. One, you are a local girl to me, so I appreciate that, in Maryland, so that makes me very happy. And you mentioned Sold a Story. I hope everybody listens to it and gives it a listen to give the background and the energy and the information. Woof. I just wrapped that. Well, there's one more to be released, right?
Yeah, it's tomorrow, I think.
I can't wait. I cannot wait. We could have a whole discussion on unpacking the Sold a Story podcast. So
absolutely.
That was my little side note. So what brought you, what initially inspired you to pursue the field of reading?
Wow. Okay. So that's a really good question. I went to Syracuse University and I went for undergrad for a track scholarship. I was a psych major. And then I pursued education because I knew I always loved kids, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it. And so if anyone knows Syracuse University School of Education, they're very progressive in the ideology around inclusion and all meaning all. But what's ironic is I never learned anything about dyslexia. I never learned anything about really how to truly teach a child to read. I took a reading methods course in my special education work, but I don't ever really remember learning about dyslexia. So when I graduated, I had this elementary degree and a master's degree and a special education degree, but I knew that I wanted to go into special ed. I didn't know where that would land me. I didn't know what it would do, but I ended up at the Swift School, which is in Roswell, Georgia. And that was when I had this interview with the head of school at the time. And I always credit Swift because it's just a special place in my heart. And he was asking me, do you know what Orton Gillingham is? Do you know what dyslexia is? And I was literally like, I'm going to fail this job interview because I don't really know what I don't know, but I really want this job. And it's a 4th grade position. And I know I want to be an elementary school teacher. So I ended up getting the job because he realized I had this thirst for knowledge. I really wanted to understand. As I remember, I said, who's Orton Gillingham? Is this someone at the school? Like, who is this person? And of course he laughed just like, we just did, but he could tell that I really wanted to learn. And so that was really the start. I ended up getting a job. I moved down there in June, I believe, to start my associate levels coursework. And that was when I worked with my Orton Gillingham fellow amongst other colleagues and parents. And that was really the eye opener where I was like, wow, teaching kids how to read is not easy. And I am getting this like amazing coursework and practicum with students in my class. And it kind of just fell into my lap. And I want to teach kids how to read. It was just how my journey set me up for success, if you will.
Which is a great intro because you've mentioned dyslexia, but there are a couple more D's in that conversation. So can you tell me what the 3 D's are before we get started on explaining them?
Sure. So I have coined the term D cubed because just in my journey of like trying to have this elevator pitch, I'm like, it's so much to say dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. So I say D cubed, right? And so those who are in my community and who know my work know what I'm referring to. So when I say D cubed, it's exactly that: dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia, or some folks say dyscalculia. And it's all encompassing because they're all language-based learning disabilities or differences.
Let's talk about that. And I want us to start with dyscalculia because it is probably the least understood and heard about in conversation. So can we, dyslexia is a common term and one that we are going to try to fit into our show later. But why is dyscalculia not talked about so much? And what is it?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I personally think from my experience, and I actually learned more about dyscalculia when I was in public school, and it wasn't because of training. It was because of my own grounded research, my own experience teaching language-based learning different students in specialized schools, and then applying that to public school to realize there's something going on here. And it's not just this kid is lazy, or whatever math teachers say, they just are like, oh, they're not working hard enough. So I think there's just not a lot of knowledge around it. And when there isn't awareness and knowledge, you can't have trainings on it. So I think that's kind of the first thing. So I really truly feel that from my experience, math teachers who are working with students who, let's say, aren't excelling or aren't getting the concepts as quickly, they just assume that students are lazy. They're not applying themselves. And really what I think is happening is there isn't the awareness, there isn't the knowledge. So if that's not addressed, then you can't have trainings for teachers to know how to do better. Because when we know better, we do better. So for me, I describe dyscalculia as essentially the easy definition is dyslexia, but with numbers. But it is more complex than that. And I believe there is research that supports that about 3 to 7% of children, from an article, this is actually from a 2019 article titled The Diagnosis and Treatment of Dyscalculia. So 3 to 7% of children, adolescents, and adults suffer from dyscalculia. So when you really think about that in relation to dyslexia, there's like a 9 to 12% population of dyslexics. So dyscalculia is a bit smaller, but it's still prevalent with comorbid disabilities as well.
So what are some common signs and symptoms for both professionals and parents to kind of think about? And it's very timely that we're talking about dyscalculia, because I was on the phone with a mom this morning that was questioning if her child had it. So what are some signs and symptoms that parents can kind of keep in their head as they're watching their child through the math curriculum?
Sure. So this is actually taken from the Dyslexia Association, and you can actually see signs and symptoms as early as preschool. And I think more than often parents are like, oh, no, it's fine, or oh, they'll get it, or whatever it is. And I think that that's comfortable for us because we just assume things will just kind of click. But really, if we take action and intervene earlier, then we know more. So a few to kind of rattle off for preschool age: if they have trouble counting. And I know that some of these might be like, oh, it's fine, but just keep these in mind. So have trouble counting, struggles to connect a number to an object. So if there are like 3 apples and there's the number 3, can they really make that connection, that quantity connection, or are they struggling with that? Are they struggling to recognize patterns, like smallest to largest or largest to smallest? And it's actually interesting because I have my youngest daughter is almost 5. And the other day she was setting up her bed. One of her jobs in the morning is I make her bed and she puts her stuffies on her pillow. And she said to me, Mommy, I want to size them from smallest to largest, and then the top, largest to smallest. And that is a preschool concept. So if your child is struggling with that, that could be something to really factor in. There are a few other things too, like struggling to recognize, for example, 3 plus 5 is the same as 5 plus 3, really understanding that associative property. Having trouble with some place values. So maybe knowing that 10 looks different than 1, things of that nature. And there are a few other signs and symptoms that I could keep rattling off, but those are a few to really think about. And maybe, Wendy, you can link this in the show notes for people to kind of see what these signs and symptoms are, because there are a lot in primary school that we can kind of hone in on to see, okay, this might be something to really think about. Another thing I do want to touch on is how dyscalculia impacts adults, teenagers. So this is actually really interesting. Social skills. So if you think about elementary, middle school age, or even high school, and we think about games, we think about money games, or we think about, going out with your friends and paying something or adding tip, like that can be very stressful, and it might require a lot of processing, or it might require a lot of quick number crunching, and depending on working memory, we know that that can be an issue. So dyscalculia can impact social skills. It can also impact a sense of direction. This one is a huge eye-opener for me. I actually interviewed a high school girl who was an amazing advocate for herself and others in this space of dyscalculia, really in the D-cube space. And she was telling me how nervous she was about taking her driver's test. So what we don't realize is when we learn to drive, we're on autopilot, right? We're just driving down the street. We're like, oh, there's our exit. Oh, got to merge over. That requires planning. That requires looking at your speedometer to make sure you know your speed limit, to know how far apart you are from the car in front of you, to be able to anticipate directions, to know how to merge over. So your sense of direction is huge. Also, time management. So there is a gentleman of mine who I actually interviewed who's from Norway, and he shared his dyscalculia story and how he gave himself accommodations. So he told this story about how he had timers to set before he would get to work, because he had no concept of time when he was in high school. So he would actually set a timer for 5 minutes to know this is what 5 minutes feels like. So I only have 5 minutes to do whatever. So that whole concept of time is something to really think about, that I know a lot of teachers get frustrated with students where they're like, why is this taking so long? Or like, you realize you've only done one thing in 20 minutes. Well, they don't have a concept of time, so you have to teach that. And then the last one is the money management, which I talked about that with social skills. So dyscalculia really impacts so much, just like dyslexia does, but I just don't think there's that awareness to really know why these things are impacting our students or adults.
Fascinating. Fascinating.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are folks listening that are like, oh my gosh, light bulb, light bulb, light bulb moments. Can you just share with us, what are some common barriers that this can present, say, for school and progress within school?
Okay, so I always use my examples from when I was co-teaching middle school math. I really think the barriers, so I taught co-taught eighth grade math for 3 years. And eighth grade curriculum, at least in Maryland, it was just like, what do I call it? I called it a buffet. You had your geometry unit, you had your algebra unit, you have your statistics unit. And it was so interesting to really see these eighth graders that struggled. And it was just like such a social, emotional, holistic approach where it was like this unit, they're struggling because geometry is too abstract and they don't understand that reality, a connection in their lives to know how to apply this. But there's also the barriers of when this isn't identified or understood at that preschool primary age. When we get to systems of equation that requires 5, 6, 7, 8 steps to solve a problem, and we have students that are struggling with basic addition or basic understanding that quantity is bigger than that, we're going to really have some real challenges here. And so when you have the student component, then you have that teacher, and I'm speaking from a public school standpoint, the teacher stress. There's so much to cover in a math curriculum in a year, at least in the state of Maryland. That's all I can speak on. But there was so much for us to cover in those however many days. And then we had to prepare for the standardized tests. So it's just this like complex systemic issue that when I would go to county PDs and we would go to, you know, the special educator would go to whatever classes they co-taught. So I would go to math PDs or I'd go to English PDs. This was never talked about. It was more about how do we get our students to perform better? You know, I felt like nebulous concepts. They weren't like, you know what, we're looking at the numbers, we're seeing that this is a thing. This is something that our teachers need to be trained in. This is something that at least they need to understand or have some sort of screeners. So how do we kind of get them educated to then really fill in those gaps? And now I know that was like a lot kind of just thrown out there, but I mean, I just feel like there are so many barriers, like so many systemic barriers.
Yes. And so when you think about it, kind of to step back, when talking about the preschool and the foundation, and it really runs through for a lot of things, right? So, you know, you have a parent that says, you know, I'm not really sure what to do. Or you have a teacher who says, you know, I think they're okay. They're fine. They're doing fine. They're sweet in class, no behavior problems, or whatever that conversation could look like. But if you have, you know, parents and educators, especially when it comes to math and really a lot of things, will say, oh, well, there's a calculator for that, or there's spell check for that, you know, it's fine. But it really is this huge ripple of an impact, especially when you had mentioned, you know, the social impact, time management, money awareness, financial skills. So it really does build upon each of these steps as kiddos are going through the grades, and definitely is going to impact that future independence, education, and employment. And so again, as parents, asking the questions, really trying to get the answers. And that's a lot of what my hope is for this podcast, is to be able to share this knowledge so that parents can say, okay, I need to ask these right questions so it's not this compounding impact.
Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree with that. And, you know, Wendy, when I was really doing research on dyscalculia, probably about a year and a half ago, I was like, you know, I really want to learn, where did this come from? Like, what are the types? What's going on here? It's actually very intimidating. And I say that being someone where I feel like I'm comfortable talking about this, but it is, the thing about math is it's its own language. So if you are struggling already with learning English, meaning just English language arts, I'm talking about if English is your first language, and you're struggling to understand grammar, just mechanics, then you go to math class and there are like 3 or 4 different ways to show how to multiply. And then there's like 3 different ways to show how to divide. And then you hear sum and addition and all of these crazy things. And so what's important to know with dyscalculia, there are 2 subtypes. And within those subtypes, and I have an Instagram post that has a visual of this, there's an umbrella of what this looks like. So I just want to quickly touch on this because this is really important. So there's so there's mathematical computation disorder. So that is one subtype. And then there's mathematical reasoning disorder. And so within those subtypes, there are 9 types of dyscalculia. It's nuts.
Oh, yeah. So then how do you really tease out what is what? And kind of jumping ahead, but we talk about comorbidity within these conditions. So how is a parent or professional supposed to tease out to know, you're talking about 9 different types, and somebody that doesn't know, have the strong background that you do to ask the questions, in terms of what can comorbidity look like, and how do I support this student, and how do I tease out truly what is impacting that child so that we can bridge those gaps?
I mean, that's honestly the $1 million question. Because it really is, because I believe Maryland is now putting dyslexia on IEPs, right? And dyscalculia and dysgraphia. But here's the bigger issue. When we look at public school testing, it's my understanding that each county or district, wherever people live, they have a set battery of assessments that the psychologist performs, that the OT performs, that the SLP performs. It's not until the results are not, it's not until parents are not happy, right? That they push for more, that they then pull out the big guns, which from my experience are the tests that the private providers use. So it's really this, again, this systemic complexity where I don't even know, from my experience with speaking with neuropsychologists, and this is, a quest that I'm on, can they actually say this child has dyscalculia and they have operational dyscalculia? Like, this is the subtype of that I mean, can they do that? I don't know. I really don't. But that poses a problem, because let's just say you have a neuropsychologist that can say that and puts it in the report, and then the parents argue, we want this on the IEP. What does that mean to the teacher? Teacher doesn't know what that is. So then that causes systemic issues where it's much easier to go back to IDEA for those 13 subcategories, and you just put SLD, and then you're vague, and then you're covered legally and you're good. But we now know that we're not good. So I don't know, Wendy. It's the $1 million question.
Dr. Lauren, we could record a whole nother podcast on public school testing versus private school testing, and what that means, and the categories, and asking for training within an IEP meeting, and all of that goodness. We need to have a whole follow-up conversation about that, because it really is important for parents to understand what that means and their rights.
Right.
So, but for the purpose of our conversation now, we've introduced dyscalculia. Can we just chat a little bit about dysgraphia? Because that's another one that's not as discussed, as common as dyslexia.
Yes, absolutely. So with dysgraphia, again, this is a language-based learning difference or disability. And I always use those terms interchangeably based on who I've spoken to, because some folks see it as a disability because it was robbed of who they could have become because they were diagnosed later in life, versus see it as a gift because they were diagnosed at 6 or 7 and got the appropriate intervention. So I always say those interchangeably. Dysgraphia is, okay, so I gave the statistics about dyscalculia and dyslexia. So apparently, according to Attitude magazine, dysgraphia is about 5 to 20% of our population. So that's kind of a huge range, but you know what? It honestly kind of makes sense. So I want to touch on the fact that depending on how old your child is, some people might view dysgraphia as more of a fine motor issue, versus some folks might view it as a writing processing issue. You're not wrong. It could be both, and depending on your child. So some of the common signs and symptoms are forming letters, writing grammatically incorrect sentences, spacing letters. So spacing is really interesting. I've tutored students that are younger, first, second, third grade, and when you look at their writing, sometimes it's not really age appropriate. They might have really big letters, or they might start off, rather than if they're on, I know people can't see me, but I'm like air tracing paper, and starting at the left side of the paper, they might start in the middle. I've seen that before, where they don't have a concept of, no, we got to start here, and we have to really, make sure that we are lining up our words. So spacing letters correctly, writing in a straight line is a big indicator. If you see students kind of just going down in a circle, or for example, I've seen kids when I taught fourth grade, they would break up a word in a really inappropriate space. So if they're spelling the word cat, they would have like CA and then put the T on another line. And it's like, okay, well, that kind of tells us something. Holding and controlling a writing tool. So that's where that OT comes in, with that fine motor. Clearly writing enough to read back later, and writing complete words without skipping letters. So if you have a student that has both trouble with the fine motor skills, really, planting and knowing where to place on a paper, knowing how to appropriately space letters, and they struggle with getting ideas out, that is probably a disaster if you don't know how to support them. And you might start seeing behavioral issues, because I always say reading and writing are civil rights. So if we can't read and decode and comprehend and be in discussion with our peers, no matter what grade we're in, and we also can't communicate writing, well, we're frustrated. And it's a lot better to go to the office and get in trouble rather than raise your hand and say, I'm struggling with this, I need help.
That's right. That's right. And so I kind of jumped on to dysgraphia, but I really want to kind of take a step back and forward at the same time. How can we pull this together in terms of support? So I want to make sure that we understand what that looks like if we have a student or a child that we feel is impacted with a language-based disability that falls under reading, writing, or math. And then how can we then know what support that student would need?
So I think in regards to all D-cubes, I think the first thing that I always recommend is exactly this. So you're listening to this podcast. So you're gaining knowledge. You're hearing, I didn't know the depth of dyscalculia. I didn't know the depths of dysgraphia. So now how do I learn more to know how to advocate? I actually have a podcast episode called 5 Questions to Start the D-Cube Conversation. And it's really cool. It's based on an article I found, actually. And I kind of just, weave in some of my own experiences at the IEP table. But I feel it really empowers parents that, let's just say they're listening to this podcast or any of my podcasts or anybody else in this space. And they're like, okay, I have all this, but I don't know what to do. Those 5 questions drive you to have the discussion with the IEP team or the teacher. And they're simple things that we don't even think to ask, like, well, why can't we put dyslexia on the IEP? Or what's the difference between SLD and dyslexia? And I think more than often, parents don't ask those questions for 2 reasons. They don't know. And also, there is a level of reverence and respect to a certain extent, where parents are like, well, I'm just trusting that they know what's best for my kid. Now, obviously we have the other parents that hire advocates and they're like, you don't know what's best for my kid. But I mean, I've seen those parents where I'm at the table and I'm like, they aren't asking any questions, like, and then I'm overextending because I want them to ask questions. So I know I just went on a tangent.
No, but I think that's really good. So I heard 2 questions. Why can't we put it on? And then what is the difference? Can you share the other 3?
Yeah, I'm
putting you on the spot.
I know you are, Wendy. I'm trying to think what the other ones are. I think is it illegal? Is it illegal to put these terms? Is it illegal to put like the D-cubes on the IEP? Now, technically it's not. The education department states that there's no legal reason not to, which then tells you more about your school district. So then that pushes parents to say, well, I know that the education department says that it's not illegal. Can you tell me why you're telling me you can't put this on the IEP? And then that really pushes the school to then answer those questions. And I don't know where that will go. I am not by no means trying to advocate any sort of due process here. But I'm just saying, I just want parents to feel like they do have a seat at the table, because it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous when you look at the numbers of the literacy rates, you look at the standardized testing scores across the country, and they are just awful. And it's like, we have to stop ignoring the big elephant in the room. We need to I know it's not this simple to ignore a school budget, but we've got to really put our money in a place where we're investing in getting the right trainings for our teachers to then support our students. And then for the parents to feel like my tax dollars are really at work and my child is getting what they need.
I would side note, as like a low-hanging fruit for any parent listening, if a school district at the IEP table says it's illegal or we can't do that, I encourage you to say, I need you to put that in our prior written notice. And that then is in writing. So then you have something to fall back on if you need to push forward. Again, I am not a lawyer either, but that would be my advocacy tip with that.
No, I think that's great.
All right. So do we have the other two questions?
I don't have them off the top of my head, but I am going to direct people to my podcast.
Amen to that. And then what I'll do is I will get the episode number for Dr. Lauren's podcast so we can reference it if you're thinking, what are my 5 questions I need to ask? I don't want anybody to feel like they're left hanging without the information. So now that we have an idea about what these look like, I'd love to hear about your unique approach to supporting students.
So right now, I am not in the classroom anymore, but I do love to keep my hand on the pulse by tutoring. And so for me personally, as I am building my business, I realized that the way that I approach things is from a holistic approach. So I love to have a comprehensive experience for these families, because my biggest thing is I have found that parents feel once they have this information, once they get that diagnosis, once they get those accommodations, they're looking for an OG tutor. But they think they may not realize they think this, but this is the theme I'm seeing. I found you and this is great. And this is an intervention that my kid needs. Great. So how many sessions until they're better? And as I'm walking through this and building my own business, I'm not in the classroom. I'm not, I don't have to go to my principal or whatever. I'm realizing I need the parents in on this as a holistic approach. So what I do is I usually do my diagnostic assessment. I always cater my lessons to what my students need. However, transparency is huge for me. So if I find that we are 10 hours in and I'm not seeing the progress that I want to see, and it seems as if maybe the student might need another service provider, I then get the parents on board and we talk and we have a very honest, candid conversation. And sometimes it's hard for parents. Sometimes they're like, but I'm paying you to do X. And do you think that you can provide Y? And then I, go back to here's what I can provide. And it takes a village. And there's so much, and it really is holistic. And so with that, parents get coaching within my tutoring packages as well. And I think in the beginning, they're looking at me like, what do I need coaching for? And it's really, and I tell them, I said, it's a safe space. So you can literally hop on the call with me and you might want me to walk you through how I plan this lesson. And maybe you want to do some extra work with your child. Or maybe you're stressed about this upcoming IEP meeting and you want a game plan. Or maybe you just want to have a good cry, whatever it is, and so I feel like I've seen a lot of positive energy and just, I love working with that holistic approach, not just here's an hour, here's the invoice, that's not what I'm all about. I'm all about making that systemic change by connecting with the family at the grassroots level.
That's right. And it's a family system, right? So if there's an impact that their child is having or a child is having within a family, it's impacting everybody. And so having the parents understand the child's perspective and having you walk through that with them is a blessing. You talk about a 5-prong approach. What does that mean? What are the 5 prongs?
Yes. So it is school systems. It is understanding. So understanding the DQs. It is special education. It is that community, and it is also advocacy. So when I do my Instagram posts, I try to sprinkle in some of that. So it's, really speaking to the teachers and the parents when I do school systems. Like I want them to understand like, hey, here's what's going on here. Here's maybe what's not happening. And here's something you might need to know about. that advocacy is really about the parent and the teacher. You know, how can they advocate to know how to really support my students in the classroom, but how can you as a parent actually say, how do you support my kid in the classroom? Actually, it's really interesting to go back to Sold a Story. There was this one parent, which I'm sure you'll remember this, Wendy, where she was so upset that I think her son's name was Charlie, that her son wasn't reading. And she said she regretted that she never wrote a note or said anything, because she said she really trusted the school and didn't want to upset them. When meanwhile, she's like crying silently at home, realizing her child's struggling, but she didn't want to upset the school district. And I think that that is, yet again, a system that's put in place where, you know, it's kind of like us going to the doctor and we're like, I don't agree with what you just said. You're not really going to say that unless maybe you've been in this journey and you're frustrated and you haven't gotten answers. But I want parents to feel like you can push and pull and ask and all of that. So yeah, it's really just all of those 5-pronged approaches where I personally feel a lot of people see it as it's just academic, but it's really not. It's all about understanding all of those components, and community is a huge component to that, which is why I now have a parent community, because I really want people to feel like I can drop in a line, I can ask a question, I can share my story, I can hear this mom and feel like there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
I think as parents, oftentimes you feel alone in a journey because maybe you don't have a friend or somebody in your community that's going through something similar to ask. So providing that space is incredible so that parents can feel like I'm not alone in this process. You mentioned advocacy, and in addition to community and speaking up, like the parent of Charlie and Sold the Story. I think the best way, and I'm going to ask you this as well, is to, when you approach the school, to have some kind of data. Right. Yes. So that you are not just coming from this, you are coming always from a place of fear and love as a parent, but that you have some data to kind of back up what you're asking for. And so can you tell me more about the data that you are collecting when you're working with a student, and how can that inform either an IEP team, or how can we help parents understand how to collect data, which sounds overwhelming and scary, but I think as professionals, you and I can help break that down for a parent so that they can then go to the school with information, not just something's not right or my child's struggling.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great question. And I think that's another reason why I love my comprehensive packages, because I do that. So what I do, and I tell parents this, I set up a whole Google folder for them with all information, with all annotated lessons. I know it sounds nuts, but I just love to like really have that narrative, because that's also data. So what I usually do is I start off with my diagnostic assessment. So I use the Gallisol-Ellis. I don't know if you're familiar with that or if others are familiar with it. I've been using that as my diagnostic assessment for decoding ever since I was at Switch School. It gives me such rich data. So what it does, it's a 3-part test. So it breaks down all of the sounds. I mean, there are so many sounds, controlled, vowel teams, everything. Then it does spelling. Then we do reading. So that is a whole piece of data that actually drives where the lessons are going. So that's one piece. I also do fluency. So I use Wilson readers. I don't want to say I don't believe in leveled readers. I think there's a balance, not balanced literacy, but I think there's a balance where once kids know the words, maybe we can, weave those in. But I always start off with controlled Wilson decodables because I love those. That's just how I was trained. So I pull things and then I do timed reading. So then I have a whole fluency chart. Like we started here and you started at 35 words per minute. Let's try to increase this 5 words per week or whatever the goal is. And then every single lesson, I have some sort of data points on like how many sight words do we know? How many sight words can we read? How many sight words can we spell? How's our fluency with small sentences? So I have a lot, which is why they're called comprehensive packages, but I find so much joy in writing that narrative and really having those numbers, because for me, I know that if I'm paying someone a pretty penny, like here's all of this information, I'm going to bring it to the school, because the school will say your child's on grade level, they're in 5th grade. And then you're like, well, we have a true Wharton Gillingham trained practitioner here that says otherwise. And I'm fine with otherwise, because this is data supporting where we're going and what's happening. So I just got really passionate about this.
Oh my gosh, I think we're kindred spirits for sure, because that's exactly through learning essentials. And when I work with my reading intervention students, 100%, I start with where are our gaps, where are our gains,
Yes.
and we do an assessment because I want to take a deeper dive for all of those reading elements that you just mentioned. And I hope that parents jot that down as well, because you want to know, where are we in reading, fluency, comprehension, phonemics, phonemic awareness? Where is our breakdown? Where do we know our sounds? Where do we not know our sounds? And then from there, each session, I also send home a lesson note so that you can see what transpired during that session with data points. So we can see where is our growth, where are pockets of vulnerability, and that then drives your next session. And so I think as a parent, understanding that and having somebody help you through that. Now, if you don't have access to one of us or a reading intervention person, what could a parent do to kind of do their informal data collection that they can bring to the school?
That's a really good question. And I don't have like a quick wit answer to that. I mean, I'm always about sharing resources, but I don't know. I know that there are a lot of homeschooling moms out there, and so I don't want to offend anyone, but I guess I feel that sometimes it's hard for parents to know what to assess. And like I said, I mean, I don't know, maybe there are some moms that are going to go Google Gallicel Atlas now. I don't know, but you also have to know how to give the test.
That's right.
So I think that's a really challenging question, because I know more than often some parents might be like, let's work on your reading. And then their idea of working on their reading is to get a level reader. And I mean, I actually had this is a true story with my pre-K daughter. So she had a book fair. We all love the Scholastic News book fair, right? So she had a book fair. She wanted to get a level reader because she's learning to read. So my daughter had her Scholastic book fair, right? And so she wanted to get a reader. And of course, we're talking, well, you're in pre-K. So she's like, that says pre-K. Can I get that? So it's a leveled reader. So she gets home and it's not appropriate. I mean, there are words like another and otherwise. I mean, things that she uses vocabulary wise because we speak to her that way. But her confidence was going down the drain because she could not decode those vowel team words. She just didn't know. So then I said, you know what, we're going to work on reading mommy's way. And so I did do 10 minutes of reading with her. She reads decodable, words in the Wilson book. We read those words. And then now we're reading sentences. And she's like, this is a sight word I'm learning at school. And then when she tries to guess, I'm like, sound it out. And I'm like, mommy's never going to give you a word you can't read. And so because I know how to do that, I can assess her, but I feel like parents want nothing but the best for their child. So they're going to go get those leveled readers, and then they're going to see their child struggling. And then that's going to turn into that self-esteem. I can't read this. I'm in first grade. So I don't know. I think it is difficult for parents to know how to assess unless they are trained practitioners or professionals.
Right. Correct. But I'm wondering, just through this conversation here, is just that thinking about, as a parent, where do you see your child struggle? Do they know sight words? Are they reading something and don't have an understanding of what they just read, or just some really general sense of kind of identifying where those struggles are, whether it's in math,
Right.
Where that breakdown, and just so that when you go to the school, you have some sort of information. And then how long is it taking them to do their homework, so that you have some sort of data to bring to the school to say, all right, they're breakdown in tears every time they see a math sheet, and they have no idea of the concept of what sum or
Right.
mean or median or, wherever that is. And, I'm kind of going across the board from young to old, but, I don't think they visualize when they're reading, or they have a real hard time formulating thoughts to put into a paragraph. So I think kind of just taking a pause and saying, where is that breakdown, instead of coming to the school and saying they're having troubles.
Yeah, no. I think that's excellent. And as you were talking, I was thinking, I mean, I had a student where we had to tell him no more than 20 minutes on homework, because he would spend like 3 hours because of his processing, because of his perfectionism. And it was literally like, No, that's the data we have right there. Because the dad was just like, it's a fight every night. And I'm like, it should not take you 3 hours to do 5 math problems and you need downtime.
No, 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 for sure. Absolutely. Exactly. And then just really kind of honoring that space for the child. Can you share a recent or even not recent success story of how your services have impacted students and or teachers, parents, staff?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a student this summer. So I'm going to preface this by saying when you have Orton Gillingham tutoring on a consistent basis, you see more growth. You really do. So this young student came to me eager to learn, wanted to really read, was a rising second grader, loved their energy. And I saw the student 4 days a week. And this student not only had the confidence, but improved their literacy, their fluency from day one. And I tutored them, I think, for it was 2 months. And so it was a whole summer and went up like 40 words per minute. And it was amazing. And it was really and the parents, they did the coaching. They were very new to this journey. They literally just got their psych. The mom found me. The mom was a teacher. She was local in Maryland and was like, I work with high schoolers. I don't know what to do. So I basically coached them through, here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to set up. When you guys get on the call, this is for you. Ask me any questions. And they utilized those resources, and their child had a thirst for knowledge. So they were ready to learn every time we had those sessions. And so that was just like the perfect storm of success, where they wanted to learn. I brought the lessons, I pushed appropriately, and they made the leaps and gains. And it was amazing. I mean, really, that was the start of me. And this was when I first started my tutoring educational consulting business. I was just like, where is this going to go? What service can I provide that is a success? And it was a success. And I've had other students as well, where it's just been, it's a lot of work, but it's very rewarding. And I know you understand that.
What's life-changing for kids?
Yes.
Life-changing. I mean, like you said, you need to know how to read and write. And I always say swim as well. That's my other
Yes.
one, but you do. And it's life-changing. So you've mentioned a couple of times Orton Gillingham or OG tutoring. And so for folks that are listening that don't know what that is, can you just give a quick little, what is it? And then if folks are seeking that support, what should they ask when calling to find the right support for their child?
Okay, so this is a loaded question. And actually, I just did a podcast interview yesterday with one of my colleagues and friends who's an Orton Gillingham fellow about some of this. So in summary, Orton Gillingham is so there were two people over 100 years ago, Dr. Samuel Orton and Anna Gillingham. Basically, as a team, they realized this multi-sensory approach was the best way to teach the dyslexic brain. So that's a quick summary. You can go to the Academy website, look up all the history, all that good stuff. One thing I will say is there is a difference between a trained Orton Gillingham practitioner through the academy versus someone who says they're trained. Now, the best way to put it is Orton Gillingham is in the public domain. So anyone can say they are OG trained, but parents kind of slip into that rabbit hole of like, oh, you're good, you're OG trained, this is great. And I've seen this happen where they will have an OG tutor and then they'll realize my child's not making the progress that this is claiming to do. And so, these are parents I've spoken to, and I would ask them, I said, well, were they through the academy? And more than likely they weren't. The difference is because we go through coursework and then we have practicum. So currently right now, I'm working on my certified level, which is 100 hours of coursework and 200 hours of student practicum work. So I need a phonics student and a morphology student. And the earliest that I could apply for this certification is in 2 years. So it is an investment and it is literally a craft. So if you're sitting here listening like, oh, I have to get a true Orton Gillingham trained practitioner tutor, what you want to do is you want to go to the Orton Gillingham Academy.org and you want to call them up or email them and say, can you send me a list of the OG tutors in my area? And that is the best way to know that they are through the academy, not just I Googled someone and they say they're OG trained.
Perfect. It is. And just ensure that you're getting somebody that really understands the nuances.
Yes.
And how to support those nuances and how to articulate those to the parent as you do. So as we're wrapping up, what is your favorite productivity tool or resource?
My favorite productivity tool. So is this for students?
It could be for students. It could be for parents. It could be for school systems. It could be, for making your supper tomorrow night.
Okay, that is a really general question. I'm trying to think. I think the first thing that came to mind was for students, and it's because I had a tutoring client last night. And the simplicity of teaching reading and the little things that get kids going is just, it warms my heart. I mean, I just brought out the rice and this little child was just so like, and the quote of the night was, "This is so satisfying." Like, I just loved how she was so excited to learn. And it was just amazing. And I was like, you know what? This is awesome. Like, I love how I've been using the same tools for over 10 years. And it really is about the expertise and bringing that energy and knowledge. But I mean, that's productivity at its best. And then just doing other multisensory things. So that was the first thing that came to my mind because I was thinking about this student I tutored last night.
Or when you're wrapping up a session and the student's like, "Oh my gosh, that went so fast. I can't wait till next week. I need more of you." And you're like, "Oh, okay, you're my favorite."
No, that is the best feeling too, knowing that at school, they're probably not saying that.
No, So what should I have asked that I didn't know enough to ask?
Honestly, I think this conversation was great because we were all over the place in good ways.
I hope so. I think we were all over the place. So I'm hoping it gets thread through with our show notes to bring it all together. But that is the excitement that you and I clearly have, that we're like, well, wait, how about this? And what about this? So is there anything that I should have asked in your expertise that I did not ask?
No, I don't think so. I mean, this is really the first, if I can think about it, I think this is really the first podcast interview I've done about dyscalculia. I mean, I've talked about it on my show, but not like an interview. It was just me disseminating information. So
I definitely feel like I need a follow-up on this. I feel like we just kind of started to brush the surface of what it is, but I definitely need a deeper dive to how to support, because I feel like parents and professionals are probably leaving with more questions, but at least it's starting the thought process and the conversation. What would it be and why if you could have a billboard with one tip for parents?
I'm going to go with the theme of when I've interviewed moms and what they commonly say: go with your gut. Go with your gut. Like, you are the expert of your child, and you may not see them during the day, when they're at school, but you see them when they come home. And if something doesn't feel right, then go with your gut.
Go with your gut. Yep. I say that all the time. Where can folks find you?
So my website is thinkdyslexia.me, and I'm on Instagram at the Dr. Lauren. And I do have a podcast called Dyslexia Mom Boss Podcast. And I have some subscriptions that I'm super excited about. And I have a parent community that is in a soft launch right now, but it will really pick up December 1st. There are some moms in the community along with some service providers, and it is pretty affordable. It's $15 a month, and I will be giving out content once a month, newsletters once a month, and group calls once a month, which I love connecting with people.
For $15,
right?
Lauren, how do people find your membership?
Yes. Okay. So if you actually go to my website, there's a little tab that says membership, or you can go to thinkdyslexia.subkit.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what a great space to ask questions, get answers, have access to you as a professional and other service providers, and truly as a parent to not feel alone in that journey, which is incredible. Every parent needs not to feel alone in their journey in supporting their child, and to have a community that can surround you in this process is invaluable.
I agree.
Thank you so much. This was quite a pleasure. I feel like we have said, we just kind of got the tip of the iceberg and what to do. Is there anything, other resources that we can throw out there for folks that are listening that you have?
I do have some courses, and I believe you can find that on my website. So I do have one about understanding dyscalculia. So I break down all the signs and symptoms. I talk about accommodations. I think it's about 2 hours, but it's chunked. because I'm all about chunking information. So
Yes.
check out my courses. I have some multisensory teaching English courses. I think there may be like 6 or 7 courses on there. I do need to have one on dysgraphia. I know that that's definitely a need, but it's in the works.
It's in the works. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I really had a fabulous time chit-chatting. And I do feel like we're kindred spirits on this journey, supporting families. So thank you so very much.
Thanks, Wendy, for having me.
Thank you again for listening to this compelling discussion with Dr. Lauren. My 3 special ed strategy takeaways from this podcast include math. It is language of its own. You can have a computation disorder or a mathematical reasoning impact. Dysgraphia is also a language-based disability, and it can impact both your writing and your fine motor. And if you're looking for a multisensory support for your child, somebody to help with a language-based disability, ensure that educator has extensive training and knowledge with explicit multisensory science-backed reading instruction that can know and understand the intricacies of your child, their learning, and their learning style. Thank you again for strategizing with us and spending your precious time listening. If you've loved what you've heard, give us a like and a follow at Learning Essentials. Looking for free tips? Head over to learningessentialsedu.com. You can download free tips to prepare for an IEP meeting, plus bonus questions to ask. I'm your host, Wendy Taylor. If you need more special education support, visit Learning Essentials, where we provide individualized and systematic approach to supporting students with various learning needs and differences through academic coaching and educational therapy. BrainCamp is our executive function support model. If you are a parent, we've got you covered through IEP coaching. Hope this helps make it a great day.